Welcome everyone to the Cyber Kumite. Today's topic, reinventing the wheel. I'm Tim Wainwright and this is Chris Salerno. Today we're talking with Mamani Older, a security person for a very long time, old friend of ours. And we're going to be talking about how security teams reinvent the wheel when it comes to security. Before we get started, today's Kumite is brought to you by our sponsor, Your Homegrown SIM. You're a truly special snowflake when you think there's nothing commercial that can meet your needs.
That's interesting. It might be one of my answers, but we'll see what's up here. So Mamani, let's jump right into this. You've been in security for many years now, and it doesn't actually have to relate specifically to security teams, but what are you sick of seeing that gets reinvented year after year? We'll answer the same question, but you go first.
Sure. Thanks, Chris, and thanks for having me.
Sure.
So related to the sponsor, actually, I think one of the things I've seen multiple places, multiple times, is like incident tracking. Don't know why, but every cyber team builds their own kind of incident tracking tool. And then you end up having to customize like how you do reporting, how you do kind of workflow, then how you ultimately get it over to like the remediation teams and infrastructure applications to go fix. But every single team seems to redo it. It's always kind of the same basic stuff, but we always seem to redo it, and it's always custom and it's always homegrown. I never understood that. You feel like by now there's got to be like incident platforms. I'm sure, and I know they exist, but we just never seem to go that direction. Don't know why.
I see. I still see I think that one's turning around. For sure, those platforms are still being written from scratch, and there's kind of really frugal, even SharePoint type workflows that get built. But I think those are more a thing of a past, or maybe more associated with general GRC now. So I agree. I've seen that, and I think that it is a funny thing to build from scratch. I mean, why do you think it happens? Is it because some of the commercial platforms and a lot of the IRW platforms have been soaked up by larger SIM vendors? Is it because that those platforms have just become tied to a specific SIM, or they were too expensive for what they did before? Why build the incident management workflow?
I think back before you had like the concept of a SIM, you kind of needed it, right? Like you didn't have your Salesforces or ServiceNows or things like that. So you have some of that legacy. Then when the SIMs came along, like your Splunks or Backstories or whatever, you still needed, like, the SIM didn't truly have you, manage kind of workflow and capacity and who to assign tickets to. And it seems to be like, because cyber has this notion, well, it's only certain people can see this and only certain people can have access to it. I feel like it becomes the baby that cyber builds for no good reason, really. I mean, you could build RBAC, you could build controls into some of the more commercial platforms, right? But it seems to become that baby that, that sits on top of the SIM or sits on top of, some sort of monitoring platform that is, wholly owned, controlled, and therefore developed and built by cyber.
So for the level of differentiation and customization that you get, you're saying not worth it. All right,
I don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, here's mine then. Mine is homegrown audit scripts / vuln scanners. And really those two things go together. So an organization wants to do their own type of security configuration checks. They want to implement a subset of CIS or something, and they wind up building their own tool that goes out and does this. And it's just such an effort to do that, I think, and then have something that is kludgy and difficult to maintain. I actually had an organization I worked with a while ago built this a long time ago, but they built this audit script that would basically fire up on most, of course, not all of their systems, because you would never be able to deploy everything everywhere. If you built something yourself, there would just be those types of weird dependencies. And it would do like a series of checks every morning. And I think when they built this thing probably 20 years ago, and it probably was that long ago, it was maybe a decent idea then, but then the inability to kind of like decommission it and still be reliant on that output, when that output is for like old operating system settings that nobody cares about. And meanwhile, the whole time that either they did this and some others that I know that try to spin up and say, we're going to build our own security checking tool. I mean, Nessus is still free. And that was like, that's the OG free tool that does this. That's too good to be free. It was too good to be free then and still is now. And of course, you can get commercial versions of this. But the idea that there's settings that you want to check that a commercial vulnerability scanner, which is pretty commodity space now, can't do is just absurd to me. I just feel like this is one of the things like don't even attempt to do that project. Waste of time.
Do you still see that, like these custom audit scripts? And is it done by audit or is it done by cyber? Like,
not done by audit. Yeah, done by cyber. Done by cyber. And you know, I think also kind of in the DevSecOps world, the notion that, you know, we need to build our own checkers for things.
Yeah.
Even though a lot of the native cloud controls in particular are getting much better and much more mature. So I still think that there's a lot of efforts out there of people saying we need to build our own, you know, our own checks for these things.
Yeah, it's interesting. My answer is kind of a flavor between both of yours, and it's just vulnerability management in general. We went from like managing everything in an Excel sheet with semi and pretty complicated like deduplication formulas to throwing everything into the ticking system. They were like, no, that's a bad idea. To then making it part of the threat intel program. And they were like, oh, maybe. And then we send the results to the SIM and it's like, what are we doing with this stuff? Like in general, we're doing a pretty bad job about managing the vulnerability management space. But every year there's like a new take on how we should be doing it. I don't know. Maybe we just need to call it something else, like vulnerability intel or I don't know, something. But yeah, it's kind of that thing. We've got a lot of vulnerabilities here. Like we don't need to keep inventing a new tool to manage them. That we've got some out there.
Well,
do you think the vulnerability management? Oh, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah. No, go ahead, Mon. You got it.
I was going to ask, do you think that because that process is so, you know, stratified between various teams in any org, right? Like no one ever owns it end to end, and then inventory gets to become painful.
Yeah, I think there's two real big problems with it, which can probably be an entire other podcast by itself. But one, there's so much data that comes from like Nessus and others. And Qualys and those scans, like nobody knows what to do with it unless you had been on the red team side at one point, you understand what that means. And then two, like chasing people down to fix it, very difficult. And so nobody wants to own it. Kind of like a PCI program. Nobody really wants to own that.
You don't have to if you get all the card data out of the environment.
That's right.
Yeah. Then it goes. It
actually doesn't go. Custom audit scripts, and
it somehow doesn't go away. Yeah, custom audit script. Okay, now I understand what you're doing.
Yeah, it'll make you compliant. Don't worry about it.
All right, so I have another one that I'm actually on the fence on, and this takes a completely different direction. But the number one thing that I think every security team, and I mean every security team does, they come up with a brand new way of representing their strategy in a deck, in a PowerPoint deck. There's you just start over. It's like if you were at a great security shop like 3 years ago and you move to a new one, you're like, okay, I guess we're going to write the security strategy deck, and you just start like completely over. Like,
you graphics, dude, I don't know.
How are there not just like three templates, like three versions of this that like you're like a small shop, really big, robust, mature shop, or something in the middle? That how is there not just like those three templates that basically take the same steps with some common visuals that you just use, and like you don't, and like how many hours and hours and hours go into those things. And so I'm on the fence because on one hand, you'd argue you need to customize the strategy deck for the organization. Yes, but we still start with like the same basic approach? Like there's no generally agreed basic approach. And I'm not saying that there aren't books and other things written on how to develop a security program, what should be included in a strategy, but like that thinking is also really fragmented. There's not like a single source where you're like, yeah, this is the thing, this is where you start for this. If you're going to look at, and Chris and I talk about MITRE ATT&CK all the time. It took forever to, and we didn't always have that. But now it's like, okay, what should your SOC and Intel and content development program be doing? MITRE ATT&CK. Like that's where you start. But like you're not just like reaching in the dark for that topic anymore. And strategy is something that's been around even longer for security strategy. How is there not like, an agreed consensus on how to do this?
Because I think the CISO role is still changing. Like, back in the day, the CISO was not like a high level exec role. It obviously has become that, right? But I think depending on where the CISO role reports to and what the scope of that role is, I think that's what's causing the strategy to shift, right? To your point, the role, even in like say 2 large companies, one could be in like more of an audit compliance function, one could be in IT. And your strategy is going to be different. I agree, focus areas is probably similar, But I think where the role is and what the scope of the role is has a lot to do with folks having to repeat and like come up with a new strategy. Ultimately, it's not a new strategy, right? When you get down to it, like the core things that every CISO tries to do tends to be the same. It's prioritization of those things, and then where you want to start with the investment, right? And I think some of that's driven by where the CISO role is and what the scope is.
Okay, that's a pretty good answer, especially the idea of programs that are more compliance or audit driven versus ones that are really kind of going
operational.
Operational and advanced capabilities. I still think that's stuff that would be formulated. Maybe those are the 3 different flavors of the template that I'm dreaming of, and you just adapt it for the scale of the organization and your resources. But anyway, so again, on the fence.
I'd like royalties if you guys trademark the template, because, just laying that out there.
Done.
All right, so that was the first set. I just want to hear, Mamani and Chris, if you guys have one version. So I kind of told one story of one thing that I thought was particularly bad, but let's spiral further down and get a little bit more negative before we get positive. What's the single worst, like, built from scratch, reinvented the wheel project you've seen? And I want to remind anybody who doesn't know Mamani at this point, she's did consulting for a long time. So any of her examples does not necessarily have to do with an organization she worked at recently. It will all be anonymous. And Chris and I have been consultants since we were babies. So any of our examples come from the nether. But Mamani, what's the single silliest reinvention project you've ever seen?
I wouldn't say silliest. I mean, I understood the business need for it, but it was just so spiraled out, so cumbersome, and it's like user provisioning, which seems to be like the simple, thing. But there have been so many instances where you go in and it's scripts, right? It's custom scripts. It's all these not random, but like all these little pieces of information you have to pull from all different places to like literally like for somebody to allow me to log into a laptop and have access to email is like this behemoth effort that takes like 5 weeks just to be able to do that. And I've truly never understood that. Like, I don't understand why it ever takes that long. And I get legacy tech and multiple systems and all those nuances, but I feel like that's one of those areas that I've always seen, as you said, historically too, that we just seem to end up overcomplicating and have like these really built from scratch or a lot of scripting or kind of interim type of configurations custom built in when like so much tech this day is cost, right? Like how is this not an easier thing?
Yeah, and ditto user access certifications, which I think kind of goes hand in hand with exactly what you're talking about. Seeing a lot of homegrown versions of that where it's like, oh my gosh, how long did this take to do?
Yeah. Talk about Excel heaven, right? Like I don't understand. Yeah. Like why is this so hard?
You're sending a giant Excel sheet of obscurely named permissions to business line unit managers who are like, I don't.
So then,
like, not only do I not know what these permissions are, I don't even know who this person is that you're saying who's in my organization. Like, what am I to do with this?
Exactly.
Chris,
like,
how about you?
I'm always trying to understand, what does that mean?
Yeah. Mine is just time and time again is a sim. Like it just like I can't get away from the number of examples I've seen people write from scratch a sim and just fail at it like every time. There's never been a good idea to write your own sim. People think it's like, oh, you just collect the logs and then you alert on things. At its core, of course, but like, man, that's just like way more complicated than that. And I've seen just like big chunks of time and money just sunk into creating them, and then they get them like sort of halfway there, but then they never really work. And it's probably not necessarily the people who are building it. It's probably not their fault. They could probably make a regular commercial sim work just fine, but the amount of effort that goes into these things is amazing to me.
Yeah, you are definitely gonna get us dropped by our sponsor with that comment.
I know. I told you.
I want to point that out.
I never liked that.
I'm going to act like they're not dropping us nonetheless. I think we, I can't say more because for that reason. Let's move to the last part of the discussion here. Is there anything worth building from scratch? What's the thing that if you're moving, into a new job, even if there's a commercial version of it, even if it's a version of like a deck or something that needs to be built again, is there anything worth building from scratch? And before you respond to that, Mamani, another message from our sponsor: commercial sim has had all kinds of kinks and limitations for years, but yours will be different. How complicated could it be? Thanks for investing in your homegrown sim. Our sponsor for just a little bit longer, I think. So Mamani, the question was, what is worth building from scratch?
I think, and this is going to sound not very cyber-ish, but, and I probably have a podcast coming up on this, so it may feed into that, but metrics dashboards. In cyber, whether you have a SIM, whether you have a risk management platform, you have all these platforms, right, with lots of different pieces of data. But to really get to like kind of one central place that kind of ties different pieces together, does kind of that scoring or however you want to represent the data, it is, I think, something that does need to be homegrown. You're going to have different audiences within wherever you go. You have like executive teams, operational teams, kind of like your direct peer, like leadership teams.
Yeah.
And there's never a good one-stop solution to try to address some of the things you need. So to me, I think one of the areas that is worth doing kind of homegrown is like true metrics reporting, depending on whatever it is that you're going to do reporting on.
I agree with a lot of what you said, and I think one of the best reasons for that is in most organizations, I would say in any organization that has a security team, security metrics are not the first type of metric they've ever seen. So metrics have already been reported up to management and the board in other ways, and security absolutely should mimic the look, feel, format. And yeah, that's a custom effort. So something that worked well in another organization may not gel or look or feel anything like what the new organization's management is expected.
And there's no good template for it either. They're rarely done well. So showing them what they need and want to see is worth doing.
Yeah, and it's got to be the subject of another Kumite. Mamani, maybe you'll join us again for that one, but because I know you have some thoughts on that topic too. So one of the ones I thought about is your own risk register. And it depends on how sophisticated it needs to be, for sure. And it depends on, how, well, yeah, exactly that. What is management expecting to see? How established are their risk management practices, which is going to vary by industry. But if you just need something to track security risks in the context of IT risks and other risks, it doesn't have to be a commercial off-the-shelf platform, I don't think. And I think that this is simple enough. I think that you can figure out calculations that work for the industry or work for the organization. Again, it might be something that they already do, but I look at that and say, these things can get expensive. And if you're trying to not buy a commercial tool in every category, this is one of the contenders.
I could see that. I
could see that too. And I would imagine most companies have something within some type of compliance group. So you kind of take that as your baseline. You could easily put something together based on the data sets you have in cyber, that is.
Related to that, before Chris gives his, this is maybe sort of investing in a skill, but I think it's close enough because it relates to dashboards. I think getting good at visualization tools, being able to pull from your data sources to tell a story. But I think, Mamani, this actually ties directly to your point about metrics dashboards. I feel like the security team should have its own visualization skills and data mining skills in order to do that, to make whether it is part of the risk register and some of the reporting that comes out of that, or part of the metrics dashboards. I think this is something that, if you get to a new security team and it's a bigger team and you don't have that, it's worth getting into it. Learn Power BI, learn Tableau, learn those platforms, those platforms that are out there.
I think that's key, especially if you're starting out and you're trying to kind of build a case for investment. I mean, everybody loves data, right? And to your point, execs have already seen some level of metrics. So if you can tell a story that's consumable by that audience, oh my God, that's a no-win situation. That's a win-win situation.
Yeah. So my example is technical, and I think you should build.
Shocking.
Yeah. I think you should build your honeypot.
Interesting.
Okay.
So
curveball right there.
There's some out there, and there's commercial solutions, but first of all, they're relatively easy to build. You're going to want them super custom for you because it's not a believable honeypot if you didn't customize it for what your network looks like or what your website represents. customize it to your environment, make it look like the real deal. It shouldn't take that much effort, and it'll be super fun for your engineers to build. So that's a fun project.
You know, Chris, I really like that idea, especially because, you know, now there's the emergence of these bigger kind of honeypot 2.0 deception platforms. And, you know, they've got strong security sales teams and they're selling themselves. But I've believed for a while that there are simple, high fidelity, but low sophistication honeypot techniques that you can implement, even if you're not, building a site that looks like yours, as you've said, but things like honey tokens and other types of concepts, honey files. I mean, these can be high fidelity alert sources that at least get started on the deception maturity roadmap without doing everything and without buying a whole big suite that needs a lot of integration. I really like that one.
Yeah.
I do too.
And building the site isn't easy. We do it as attackers all the time.
Yeah, it's true. Something. All right. How about this? One last controversial one, whether it's worth doing or not. How about building your own security framework? Not strategy, but framework. Whether it's the I'm going to make a lot of people upset. The really tired, house and pillars that a lot of people still love, kind of the Roman temple. And right. Just kind of naming the pillars different things, or however you represent it. Is it worth building your own security framework? And Chris and I have talked before about some of the limitations with leaning on things like NIST CSF. It's just not very modern. So if part of your security program is building, a threat intelligence team and a threat hunt team, okay, you're gonna jam that in there somewhere. Is it worth doing your own security framework, or do you just keep it simple here and use the standbys?
All right, so with two thoughts. I think we should, only because the threats are always changing and the paradigm's always changing. So if you stick to something that 15 years old, it may not be what you need to actually be effective at doing your job, right? On the other hand, when it comes to potentially executive level reporting or board level reporting, it's something familiar, it's something recognized. So it's kind of one of those, there's got to be a way to bridge it, right? Like take the Roman temple and then show kind of the modern version of it, whatever that might be, some new wave architecture. But I feel like you get caught in that, trying to do something new, trying to keep pace, but not being able to explain it. Yeah. That's something familiar that people understand.
Yeah, the whole idea of frameworks lacks agility, and that's the biggest problem.
And that's one of the best reasons why you would build your own. And I guess my advice for anyone who is going to do that is, if you're going to build your own security framework, at the very first communication, explain to management that it will not be the same every year, that there's going to be incremental changes, because that's why you did this. It's because it needs to keep pace with threats and securities.
Which should be. And the business.
Yeah, absolutely.
The business is going to change, right? So if you're a new market, you're all of a sudden going to have to do something different, potentially.
Great. Well, Mamani, thanks for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun to talk through this stuff with you. For everyone listening, our guest has been Mamani Older. I'm Tim Wainwright, reminding you that I taught Chris everything he knows.
And I'm Chris Lerno, and yet I still need to fill all these pages.